Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Armed with Reason podcast, brought to you by GVpedia. Today, we are grateful to have Abbey Clements back here on the podcast again. Abbey is the executive director and co-founder of Teachers Unify to End Gun Violence, and she was an elementary school teacher for 32 years. She and her then second graders are survivors of the Sandy Hook school tragedy. And since that fateful day, Abbey has been a gun violence prevention activist. She is a strategic consultant on gun violence issues for the American Federation of Teachers, otherwise known as AFT. And Abbey has been featured in various publications, events, and documentaries, including the 2024 DNC, Newtown, If I Don't Make It, I Love You, Bullets into Bells, Marie Claire, AFT Voices, American Educator, USA Today, and many others. And we also heard that Abbey recently retired, so congratulations for that too.
Thank you so much for having me. I mean,
Yes.
I'll say that I retired from teaching, but still working for kids, just in a different way.
Yes, good. Thank you for clarifying that. Absolutely. So, we appreciate you coming back here again. It was about a year ago that we checked in with you last, and unfortunately, there's been a lot that's going on in the country related to gun violence. In some ways, it wasn't surprising that to start off the school year, we had a school shooting in Minneapolis, Wisconsin at the Annunciation Catholic School. And that prompted you to publish an op-ed in the Minnesota Reformer. So if you can speak about, in that op-ed, you mentioned that gun violence was a public health crisis. If you want to tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Sure, thanks. It's a great question. I mean, if we think back, seems like a lifetime ago when we had Dr. Vivek Murthy, former US Surgeon General, who clearly defined our situation with gun violence as a public health crisis. The numbers are staggering. Just thinking alone at the sentence, gun violence is the leading cause of death for children and teens in America, should prompt every sector of our society to make a change, to address this in some way. So since that's true, then it affects families. And we know that, going into public places, being out in the world, there's always this impending possibility, this impending fear that something might happen. And so I think, looking at it from a teacher's, once a teacher, always a teacher. And Teachers Unify was founded by 3 public school teachers. We're really looking at this as a systemic problem at where the folks who work in schools can really be trusted messengers and have a platform to hopefully make some change, even if in the smallest way.
Yes, absolutely. And the work that you're doing now, as not in the classroom, but for all the other ways that work needs to be done in order to make this society a safer place for our students and teachers within the classroom. I know that you have recently been promoting the crisis intervention and support team that you have created. It makes me very sad that this is something that needs to exist in the first place, but unfortunately it is our reality. So we would just like to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about that and what your vision is for that support team.
Thank you. So looking back at sort of where I came from into the gun violence prevention space as a teacher, impacted so directly, Newtown got a lot of attention, the attention of the entire world. People were shocked and disgusted and thought that this would really change things. We got more resources than anybody could imagine a school, a community would get after such a horrific tragedy. We even got a new building. And we did get some excellent clinicians who came in and worked with us long term. We had funds set up for the teachers and for the students. But the best and most helpful support that I received personally and many of my colleagues received was through the connections that we made with Columbine survivors, two of whom came to Newtown after the tragedy in a snowstorm and sat with us at a giant table, people who were just coming out of this in a daze, extremely angry. That was me. And kind of told us what to expect. And honestly, I'm getting the chills right now because I was shocked to hear that this was going to be like a life-changing thing. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I couldn't even think far ahead and think, wait, sorry, did you just say that you think about this every single day for over 15 years at that point? So that connection that I got that day and then had in the months and years following where I could call one of them and say, how does this really work if you leave and go to another building? How do the other teachers treat you? Like I'm walking away from people I know and who've been through it, but how do I move forward? So it was a kind of connection that was invaluable. And so right away, I started thinking that that's what we needed. It was this kind of like a rapid response team, like a task force of sorts that we would, be able to deploy when we were needed into another school shooting community when it would happen. And so I thought that I was the only one who had this idea. But obviously, folks from Columbine who had already been doing it and people who have been doing it naturally from Columbine on, maybe even before Columbine, have been thinking that, we really need like a systemic, a plan, a framework, an organization that could help fund something like this where we could actually go and be helpful because we get it. And so this was always an idea that Teachers Unify had from the beginning. It's only been almost 4 years. We haven't been around very long, but that we wanted to uh, make sure this was a core part of our organization. And so we've been doing a lot of back work, and over the summer, we gathered a team of 12. We're a founding intervention support team of 12, leadership team of 12. Most of us are school shooting survivors. We're from Columbine, Sparks Middle School, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Sandy Hook, and Santa Fe High School. There is a first responder from the Highland Park, Illinois parade shooting who's also a school counselor. And we have an educator who witnessed gun violence as a very young child. And we're under the leadership of a clinician who actually happened to be the best clinician and help that my colleagues and I received came down from the state of Connecticut to Sandy Hook, and we stayed with him for many years. Anyway, he's always been a part of like my aftermath, but not necessarily part of the gun violence prevention space. And, over the years, sometimes it just takes somebody to say, after this tragedy, I am done. I am getting more involved. This is ridiculous. And for him, that was the Covenant school shooting in Tennessee. And he just said, I need to be a part of this. And he is the leader of this team. And I'm like incredibly proud and humbled by this team. And I think this is the exact framework that we needed, that over the years, there was just like maybe not just a missing part. I mean, you need somebody to organize it, you need funding, you need the capacity when people are teaching all day to do something like this. But to have an expert, Dr. Michael Schultz, who is a family therapist, who is an expert on when tragedy hits affects a system. And that's when you have like so many complex issues. It's not just the teachers, it's the support staff, the secretaries, the administration, the cleaning staff, the lunch ladies. It it's epic proportions. And you know, in the news cycle now, we talk about it in 2 minutes. And so, you know, you spoke earlier about the tragedy in Minneapolis. Well, just a few days after that, there was a tragedy in Colorado at Evergreen High School, and we've been in touch with the folks there and are laying the groundwork for hopefully some um, support for the short and long term. And Annunciation, but we don't know anyone there. So if there are connections there, we would be honored to be a part of that and hope that we can help in some way.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes sense that there's not a one size fits all sort of response for everybody based on the roles that they play in the school system. So
No,
kudos
and
to
it's very complex, and you know, you want to be a part of the infrastructure plan that they have. You know, you just can't kind of railroad yourself in and say this is what needs to happen. You have to do it in an open way. But sometimes what happens, and it happened to us too. I mean, we did have these two incredible humans who came from Columbine. I'm ever grateful to them. But there are people who can be such a support to educators and school staff who go through this, but sometimes there's a barrier, and I think the school district doesn't do it to not allow help to come through, but they want to be in charge, or they want to make sure that it's available to everyone, or they're trying to protect us, right? If they don't know who these people are, but sometimes like you know, there's like just this sense, and already we have that with some of the educators at Evergreen who say like I need to know from people who have gone through this.
Yeah, and one of the kind of questions that arises for me here is like, are there like a couple or a few specifics of this like crisis support that are essential and often lacking elsewhere? Because many times, particularly with high profile shootings, there is like a surge of people wanting to do something, wanting to help. And so, like, what are the specific like channels that this crisis support helps with that are missing elsewhere? And then is there anything that like regular people can do in those specific times to help with that?
What a really great question. You know, I mean, use us as an example. We had all the help swoop in, and we did have some long-term um, help, you know, that was actually lasted for a very long time. But most people don't get that. Most schools don't get that. And so what we're looking at is a trajectory of help from the very beginning to, you know, long term. You're talking about if it's lifelong, you know, how do you, and I think the way that we're looking at it is like it's beneficial for administrators and for school leaders to invite us in, because if people get the help that they need, or the support that they need, that's long term and not just right at the aftermath. I think that there's like a further problem that we have in this country about like grief and trauma. We think it's like done. You know, if you read even some headlines that happened like over the last few weeks, it's like they're you know, working on their healing, and I'm like, healing? They barely woke up from this nightmare. So we think about, you know, long term, and also people need different things at different points of the aftermath. So there's evaluation piece, like what do they need? And not just asking them what they need, because that's also a really hard question to answer when you're right there in the thick of things, but thinking about our expertise and knowing or experience I guess both of those things we can say, here are some of the things that might happen. Here are some of the things that your surviving kids might say when you go back to school. And here's what was helpful for me. I don't know if it's going to be helpful for you. I feel like you also need to know that there are people there that you can count on, even if you don't call them all the time. You've got a few names out there that you can reach out to when you have that first fire drill or your first lockdown drill after. So some of the pieces are like, evaluation, like what people need right now. What would the intervention look like, and how would it be working with the support that's already established with the district? Because again, we want to work with them and not against them, and help their helpers so that they know like we can be a support to them. And then I just think it's about there's this phrase that Dr. Mike uses called postvention, like because your relationships change. How do you sustain being an educator if that's something that you can do or you have to do? Sometimes people, and they've said this to us too, like, okay, if you don't want to be a teacher anymore, then you can just, if it's not working out for you, you can just do something else. But that's oftentimes what teachers have only ever done. And that phrase like born to be a teacher, you just have that's just what you've done. So because this happened at work and we can't control this as a country, now we have to start. And how does that work? How do you transfer? How do you go to another? So there's so many levels of this that we get and can help facilitate.
Yeah. And another project that we know is kind of going from like helping in the aftermath to preventing these to begin with is the I think it's a couple day old Project Lockdown. Can you tell us more about that and just like what all's involved with like the effort to get people to secure firearms, how it might differ from other somewhat similar projects, and just what the incentive there was?
Sure. About maybe 8 months to a year ago, an ad agency, folks at this Minneapolis ad agency, so we had to actually delay the launch of Project Lockdown because of the tragedy at Annunciation. They approached us and said, "Oh wow, we didn't know that there was an organization like Teachers Unify focused on teachers. We really want to work with you." So we talked for many, many months about how they could help and how to bring the voices of children and the experiences that they have with lockdown drills and the fears that they have when they see these tragedies unfold on their phones over and over again. How do we sort of show that and at the same time elevate the voices of teachers who, according to a 2025 Gallup poll, are the second most trusted voices out there, just under nurses, apparently. And so we are, even though we're very micromanaged now, and I don't know, this is a crazy climate we're in, but according to this poll, that we are still trusted messengers. So we wanted to kind of show a way to bring forth both of these voices, the children's voices and the teachers' voices, and how we're really, teachers number one are taking care of kids. That's to keep them safe, right? That's just ground zero for a teacher. And so, but for some reason, our voices have not really been part of the solutions. Of course, we're teaching all the time, so we're busy, but we really need to be and can be. And so the idea around Project Lockdown, which I just absolutely love the name because it flips this idea of that, like a lockdown can save you. That where there's little to no data that shows that actually these from a calm lockdown to an active shooter drill, like that actually, do they actually save lives? So it flips the concept of a lockdown to actually we need firearm owners to lock down, and not the children and the teachers. And what we're hoping with this campaign and some other pieces that we're going to be working on, in addition to what we have already launched with the website, projectlockdown.org, will be resources to help people, everyday folks, including teachers, to encourage their friends and neighbors to lock up their firearms. I mean, we have that statistic that's also quite jarring, that 2/3 or more of school shooters get their gun from home or from a friend or a family member. So this is preventable, and I think we can change the culture here. We did it with drunk driving, we did it with smoking, although now we're vaping. It's not really good either, but in terms of smoking everywhere, right? And we did it with car seats. And I do think it's possible. And I think teachers can be at the forefront of that change.
Yeah, and kind of one of the things that um, comes up to me through this that's like slightly more than a pet peeve of mine is like you mentioned the lockdown drills and how there's like multi basically a multi-billion dollar industry that has sprung up around, in air quotes for those who are just listening, school safety that have no real discernible impact on actual school safety. And all this effort and training that school districts are just funneling to this industry with no evidence, while I don't have the distinct impression that nearly as many funds go to, oh, okay, there has been a tragedy, and not just like a mass shooting at a school, but other school related gun incidents, or if there's been community violence near the school as well, because like kids aren't just going to be, kids and teachers aren't just going to be traumatized if an incident happens at the school, it's outside the school as well. And there's like no effort on resources at like helping there. And we do know to a degree that gun violence can be contagious. Like people who witness gun violence are more likely to commit gun violence. Um, and nothing on the preventative side of like actually lock your guns up, because that's a step too far. Whereas further traumatizing students apparently is a norm. And one kind of semi-quick story that I believe I mentioned on the podcast back in 2019, GVpedia hosted a conference in Denver to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Columbine. And on the first day, the fire alarm went off. And to just see the reaction of the students who hadn't been part of like lockdown drills, but hadn't been directly in a school shooting situation, like we had to bring in therapy dogs, and there was an entire process. And over a fire alarm, and that's like direct trauma being caused by these lockdown drills and refusal to do anything outside of it. So semi ran, but then back on
It's
course in terms of the resource allocation.
well, it's it's really baffling and very depressing that we are spending all of this money on these gadgets that don't, there's no proof that they even work. And I also really hate, I can say I hate it when they talk about a tragedy and they say, well, because of these panic buttons, there were only 2 people who were killed. It's like, what are you even saying? And the level of trauma, we really don't, people don't see that, what you're describing, Devin, about what it's like for people to panic. And unless you have been in that, or I mean, I've met teachers who whose students are so afraid of something happening. I just have this little tiny quick story. I was presented at a Fred Rogers Institute conference this summer, and I was sitting with teachers, and one of them said that her second grader had to go to therapy because they were in a because she's afraid all the time from these lockdown drills that are giving her such anxiety. They were in a grocery store and leaving, and the fire alarm, some kind of alarm went off, and she hit the ground. And she's like, there's a shooter, there's a shooter. This is a child, and this is what we're doing to them. And so I will never understand it. I do appreciate there are legislators who push back against some of these gadgets, like the supposedly bulletproof like clipboards that kids are supposed to jujitsu somehow and get the bullets to ricochet off of them. I mean, and people buy these things thinking because people are desperate because we refuse to make the change that's necessary.
Yeah, it's like, could we be more responsible with guns? Nah, let's instead turn our teachers and students into fighters with bulletproof vests and stuff. And like, it's the very definition of insanity, and it's
Yes,
having a
it
major impact on mental health as well.
is.
Um, One of the other aspects of safe storage that I wanted to touch on is its role in preventing thefts. As we know, more than 400,000 guns are stolen annually, and a lot of those are from cars, a lot of them are from homes, and just people leaving guns unlocked and just out there ready. And those guns end up at crime scenes across the country. So, does Project Lockdown message around that potential aspect of safe storage, and how do you go about that?
Yeah, we're just coming up with um ideas at that to address the kind of pervasive lack of um commitment to lock up a firearm. If you talk to a group of people, I have two leaders who work with Teachers Unify, and I was on a podcast with a teacher. All three of them have had experiences as a child where there was an unlocked firearm around the house or available that almost could have been involved in a tragedy that involved
Yeah.
them. And almost everybody has a story like that. My father-in-law has a story like that, where he was outside target shooting with his cousin, I think, and there was like a moment where he thought he accidentally could have shot him and never picked up a gun again. So we don't talk about this enough. The both the theft of guns, I mean, that number is staggering, and the unintentional shootings that happen because of guns laying around at home. So I know we have to get beyond like literature that says, or an email that reminds people to lock up their guns, but I feel like at least if you're getting the messaging, I think the idea is that we get it like from lots of different places, from your workplace, like, hey, if you have a firearm in your car, it has to be locked. I don't even know how you lock up a firearm in a car, but that has to be done, or you're not allowed to have them in our parking lots, or it has to be everywhere. It has to be where the kids go to school, where they go to camp. Like if you're going to be visiting, you need to it just needs to be part of we have to normalize the expectation, because until then, the occasional literature that you might get, the feeling is like, oh, that's not their business. I can do whatever I want. This is my freedom. Why are they asking me about where I'm keeping this? But if it's everywhere, it's at the doctor's office, it just becomes part of what's expected when you go to places where there's somebody telling you what to do and what you expect, then I think it'll be more normalized. And I think we can do that. It's not an us against them. There are gun owners out there who are committed to this, and they share this. Think about when you send your kid to a play date, making sure that the firearms are locked up. All this is not the norm. And we've been talking about this for over a decade, and I'm sure way before that. But we're still not to the point where this the the narrative is. That's why I feel like teachers, school leaders, we have more states that are requiring the dissemination of this information several times a year. And that's what I think we need to be, where, I mean, at least in schools, right? 3 to 5 times a year, conferences, special events, the beginning of school, around the holidays. It makes sense that it would come from schools. So I just think I mean, we have to get there, because I don't know if legislation, we have a route that way.
Yeah. Well, and also making things slightly more challenging is that there's states on the opposite end that are like, oh, you need to teach about how guns are awesome. And
How is
like
this
I
a
do,
thing?
yeah, I do think like teachers, and you mentioned nurses before, and there's like surveys and studies like a decade or so ago. I'm not sure if they've been updated more recently, that talked about how many nurses and doctors were unaware that firearms were a risk for suicide. And I'm kind of wondering whether there might be the same like lack of awareness among many teachers, simply because teachers are overwhelmed with everything to where it's just not an issue that comes up unless there's direct experience, and to where like there's the almost like the education of the educators
For
sort of
sure.
thing.
No, I think you're 100% right. And that's another important initiative of Teachers Unify, is to help empower educators on this issue. They are experts of kids. And unfortunately, we don't always see that ourselves that way, just because of the way things roll out, right? And what we get blamed for. But if you have a superintendent, or if you have a mandate from the state, or you have a strong superintendent who is implementing, information about secure firearm storage, then teachers, it allows a pathway for teachers to speak up on this. If you don't have that, there is no way on earth a teacher is ever going to say anything about it, because they won't feel supported. They won't feel like, if that parent came back, um, and said, why is the teacher talking about this? But we're talking about, safety and the children's lives. So we absolutely have to have it come from the top. And unfortunately, we don't even have it in Connecticut, which I think we should have.
Yeah, one idea that just kind of occurred to me, courtesy of a conversation I had earlier this week with college student by the name of Brady Rowland, who's also on a couple boards as well, and student survivor, having gone through things. And she's been doing research on incidents of like guns near schools, like within 50 or, well, not like, I think it was more like 5 miles or something, and then how it impacts. And I was just thinking that that sort of data, because it's going to be hard to find any school unless it's like in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, with 3 students. Like, that's not going to have some form of gun incident nearby. And those can be like learning that can provide incentive for the school administrators and such, like, hey, we've had these incidents nearby. Use like use those to say, like, as an incentive to be like, we should lock up guns and stuff, and this is part of that because it's happening in the community around. So I think that's one way that the data, and then being having teachers supply that, is like, hey, these are happening in the community. It can provide an incentive to like talk about locking up guns and other resources and such. So
Yeah,
just a
that's
there.
an important part, that because people can just, um dismiss the low percentage rate of school shootings, but I hate that argument. Well, I hate when people, that all the school shootings only make up, I don't know, 0.2% of, but what they're not thinking about is the impact, the number of kids who've been impacted and then the family members. But to your point about just outside the school gates, actually the Trace, there's a recent article from the Trace that we use this statistic quite a bit, that there is an average of 57 incidences of gun violence every single day in or around schools. And I think that that's a clearer understanding of this crisis that we're in and the level of impact. And yeah, by saying, oh, well, we're not really talking, we're not talking about like, you might not need this literature about locking up your guns, but think about if it's at the grocery store, it's at the post office, then it might reach people who won't want to do harm around the school.
Yeah, I think your point about it coming from the top down is extremely relevant. And unfortunately, it feels sometimes like that's either never going to happen or it's so slow to happen. But for me, maybe it's about casting a wider net, right? Like I've been in places that are synonymous with, in theory, being safe for kids, like libraries, where they'll have gun locks just there with a pamphlet. Like nobody's, there's no inquisition. Nobody's giving you a hard time about you being a gun owner. You just like quietly take the lock and go about your way. Or a
Right.
pediatrician's office, right? Like a flyer on the back of the door or something when you're walking out. So if we can't trust leadership to take care of us, maybe we all just have to take care of each other.
Exactly.
Um, one of the things that I've been wrestling with recently and may have an article coming out in the next couple weeks or so, is how to spread the word that guns don't make us safer, which is what the evidence overwhelmingly shows. And being able to center that point while still holding space for people who choose to own guns and to discuss how to mitigate those risks once they become a gun owner. So saying like, hey, the safest home is one without a gun. Guns don't make you safer. But if you still choose to own a gun, here's the steps that you can take. And it often feels like to me that it's almost like this false dichotomy where it's like you either push the messaging that guns don't make you safer or you push the like, here's what to do to make sure that you're safer with a gun. And like those messages are somehow at odds with each other, which I profoundly disagree with and feel you should be able to have that two-step conversation without alienating anyone. And so, have you kind of encountered this in your work, and how would you recommend navigating this?
It's a great conversation, and I think it's an important one. And I feel at odds with it personally, but thinking about it like where we are in a country with more guns than people, and the access is just so easy. So what do you do in that space? There are amazing organizations. Project Unloaded, I think, they do really great work to prevent people from the urge to buy a gun or to be interested in gun culture. I think that's a really important space that they're working on. But for us, and I feel like because of schools and communities and the number of firearms that are floating around, that we don't really have a choice but to talk about secure storage. And that I I do see a potential, because like the numbers are so staggering, and it's like if they just didn't have access, especially when it comes to school shootings and into unintentional shootings. I don't know why we're so, I mean, I guess I do know why we're so slow on getting changing these numbers, but I do think we can. I don't know why we can't break through the narrative of, and I don't know why the statistics don't ignite the change that we need. You know, that we're 5 times more likely, you're 5 times more likely to get actually hurt by the gun or hurt somebody else by the gun if you have one at home, if that's
Yeah,
still correct.
doubles risk of homicide, triples risk of suicide, makes domestic violence 5 times more lethal. And like, and I think there's this like root feeling of, it just shows how effective the gun lobby's fire hose of falsehood has been on this measure
For sure.
to like just equate at a deep fundamental level guns with safety. And like we can feel it even now with all the political turmoil and chaos, and it feels like the Constitution's consistently under threat. And it's like you have mass federal agents disappearing people, and it's like it's stuff that like I mean 3 to 4 years ago we would mock NRA people for talking about how the government was coming for you, and now for a lot of communities the government's coming for you. And there's this incentive to be like, oh, I need a gun to protect from this chaos and such. And it's so deep rooted of like just I feel unsafe, I need a gun, and it's just at odds. We know it's not going to help, but it's so deep. And then like so I feel like you still have to stick with the guns don't make you safer messaging and having those conversations, and then recognize that some people, well, lots of people already have firearms. Some people will still choose to do so. And then it's like, all right, here's what you need to do in order
Yeah.
to increase the safety and also provide alternatives for safety. Because I think for a lot of people, it's like, what keeps me safe? And it's a list of one, a gun. Like, the mind really doesn't go to other alternatives. And I think having efforts to take a holistic approach to safety outside of guns is going to be crucial as well. And that applies before and then to also stuff like Project Lockdown with keeping guns secure. And so, not
Yeah.
entirely certain where I was going
No,
with this, but
I think you make a really good point about, and I feel like I could see teachers someday being able to say that at an open house. Hey, one thing I just want to, we know that the statistics show that guns don't keep us safer. But if you have a gun at home, if that's what you choose to do, please lock up your firearm. Thank you so much. See you at conferences. I mean, I can't imagine that today, but I really hope that in the near future that because that just makes sense, right?
yeah. Or it's like even if there's almost like a disease outbreak or like a fire or like anything else that impacts the communities, like I can easily see teachers being like, hey, we had like fireworks set afire over here. Remember, kids, don't play with fireworks when there's like fire hazard or whatever. And also, there were 3 shootings last week in a 5 mile radius of this school. Make sure your guns are locked up and remember this, and this. Just throwing it in there with everything else because,
Right.
or even like, I think pool safety is often one of the more frequent ones where it's just like, there's a checklist like, hey, remember to get your flu shot, make sure pools are safe. And like just adding it as part of that checklist to where it's like you're not calling people out in specific, like, hey, you're the problem. It's like, no,
Right.
there's steps for safety. This is one of them.
Exactly.
Abby, where can our listeners find details about Teachers Unify or about your new project on lockdown?
please visit our website at teachersunify.org, and follow us on social media at Teachers Unify.
And if we can be of any help with Project Lockdown, it seems like it's a fluid sort of concept that's new, which is fantastic. I'm a big fan of the theory, like don't wait until something's perfect to put it out there in the world, right? Like just do it, and if you have to build the plane while you're flying it, then
We'll do it live.
right, then do that. So
No,
please,
thank you so much.
please let
I
us
am
know if you need help.
actually, really excited about some of the resources that are developing in my head, about where we can go with this. Like just toolkits, teachers just love that kind of thing. Like how to approach your principal about, if your state doesn't have the information, like how do you get a meeting with the superintendent? Who should you go with? How to approach your, union leader? Like it could be lots of different things like that. And it seems really small, but we have to just keep trying, and we're staying in our lane to do that.
Absolutely. And if you add up all the small opportunities, they certainly can equal many life-changing in positive ways opportunities. So thank you for joining us here today, and way more importantly, thank you for dedicating your life's work to our children, not only teaching them, but um, protecting so many of them when you were at school with them on that fateful day in December of 2014, and then um, I'm sorry, December of 2012, and then now all the work that you're doing to keep kids and teachers safe moving forward. It's really powerful and really inspiring.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you do. Your the information that you put out is so important. I read it, everything that you do. So thank you for your really important work and for having this podcast. Really important. I also I've been thinking a lot about history and making sure that what we do, is everlasting and
Mm,
that it's not erased. And so I feel like these forums are so important.
Yeah. Creating a
absolutely.
time capsule for hopefully saner times.
Yes, crossing fingers for sure.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.